Between the years 793 and 1066 AD, Viking raiders carved a path of conquest that stretched nearly 4,000 miles, from the icy reaches of Greenland all the way to the great city of Constantinople. They struck fear across Europe, burning monasteries, enslaving entire villages, and founding kingdoms wherever their longships landed. But beneath the legends of Viking dominance lies a surprising discovery, revealed through excavations at 47 ancient battlefields. A truth that challenges everything we thought we knew about them. Turns out, some tribes were so fierce, so tactically sharp, that even the legendary Vikings thought twice before picking a fight. In 934 AD, Olaf the Red sailed toward Scotland with a fleet of 200 longships, only to turn back without setting foot on shore. The reason was simple: the Picts. They had mastered anti-Viking warfare so deadly and efficient that Norse sagas began to whisper warnings about the painted devils of the north. Today, we're peeling back the layers of history to uncover the enemies who actually made the Vikings afraid. Everyone knows the Vikings as unstoppable warriors, and it's true that between 789 and 1100 AD, they built lasting settlements across 23 regions, from Dublin in the west to Kiev in the east. Archaeologists have uncovered more than 15,000 Viking weapons at over 200 sites, painting a picture of a culture obsessed with battle and dominance. Yet scattered among thousands of runic inscriptions and saga accounts are peculiar mentions, names spoken with caution and respect. These weren't conquered peoples. They were rivals, the kind of foes the Vikings warned each other about, approached only with overwhelming force. Modern battlefield archaeology, combined with the study of 89 medieval chronicles written by different cultures, points to three groups that consistently stood their ground against Viking expansion: the Picts of northern Scotland, the Finno-Ugric tribes around the Baltic Sea, and the enigmatic Jomsvikings, a band of Vikings who turned their blades against their own kind, fighting with unmatched discipline and organization. These weren't simple tribes hiding in fear. They were skilled military societies, intelligent and adaptive, who studied Viking warfare and designed clever counter-strategies to break it. In the fog-wrapped highlands of Scotland, the Picts had been refining their style of guerrilla warfare for more than 4 centuries before the first Viking sails appeared on the horizon. So when Norse raiders began attacking Scotland's shores in the early 800s, expecting quick and easy plunder, they walked straight into disaster. The Picts had learned from generations of Roman invasions that brute strength and numbers weren't always enough. They understood that victory came from knowing the land, reading the enemy's mind, and using every trick of terrain and psychology to their advantage. Archaeologists studying Pictish hill forts discovered they'd built a sophisticated 3-tier defense system tailored specifically to repel Viking raids. Tall coastal watchtowers spotted approaching ships long before they made landfall, giving inland villages time to hide their valuables and set up deadly ambushes. The Picts knew the Vikings preferred fast, devastating strikes, hit, plunder, and retreat, so they flipped the script. And their most powerful weapon wasn't forged from iron or steel. It was fear itself. The Picts' famous blue woad paint wasn't just for ceremony. It was a weapon of the mind, a vivid mask of terror that turned these Highland warriors into living ghosts of the battlefield. When Viking raiders came ashore expecting to scare off a few terrified farmers, they were in for a shock. Out of the fog and heather rose warriors who seemed to melt right out of the land itself, their skin painted in swirling blue designs that shimmered in the mist like spirits from another world. Norse sagas would later describe these Pictish fighters as shapeshifters, men who could vanish into stone or melt into the earth. But myth aside, the Picts had something far more practical. They had learned exactly how to fight Vikings on their own terms and win. They invented clever traps like false harbors, stretches of coastline that looked safe for landing, but hid jagged rocks and wooden stakes just below the surface, ready to rip open the hulls of Viking ships. When the Norse did make it ashore, they faced lightning-fast cavalry raids that struck hard, hit quick, and disappeared back into the hills before the Vikings could even form a shield wall. By the year 900 AD, Viking efforts to plant permanent outposts in Pictish territory had all but stopped. The few Norse settlements that survived in Scotland weren't taken by the sword. They were built through marriages, trade, and uneasy alliances. The Vikings might have ruled the seas, but on land, especially in the vast, frozen wildernesses to the east, they met an entirely different kind of enemy. Deep in the forests of Finland and the Baltic region lived the Finno-Ugric peoples, ancestors of today's Finns and Estonians, and these were no ordinary warriors. They had evolved into something like the world's first special forces. Small, agile, and terrifyingly efficient in terrain that the Vikings could barely endure. Life in one of Europe's harshest climates had forged them into masters of survival. Archaeologists have unearthed burial sites in Karelia filled with weapons designed specifically for fighting in dense forests, curved blades for close combat, unique arrowheads that could pierce Viking armor, and most revealing of all, piles of captured Norse weapons taken as trophies from fallen invaders. Carbon dating shows these battles stretched over 2 centuries, proof of a long, unbroken tradition of successful resistance. The Finno-Ugric warriors understood one crucial weakness. Vikings depended on their ships. Their entire strategy, their confidence, even their escape routes, all hinged on those longships waiting at the shore. So the forest tribes turned that dependence against them. They would lure Viking raiders inland, deeper and deeper into the trees, pretending to flee. Then, once the Norse were lost and disoriented, they'd swing around and cut off their path back to the coast. Suddenly, these sea kings, unstoppable in open battle, found themselves trapped in a green labyrinth where their axes snagged on branches and their armor slowed them down. The forest became their cage. And if that wasn't enough, the Finno-Ugric tribes held one final advantage: winter. They had mastered cold-weather warfare long before the Vikings ever set their sights north. While Norse warriors stumbled through snowdrifts, the Finno-Ugric fighters glided silently across frozen ground on skis. They could build hidden shelters under the snow, move unseen, and strike in storms so brutal that most Vikings could barely keep their fires lit. The saga of Harald Bluetooth even speaks of the ice devils, warriors who appeared out of the blizzard, struck like wolves, and vanished like smoke among the pines. By around 950 AD, the Norse had learned their lesson. Their expansion into Finno-Ugric territory came to a full stop. The few Viking enclaves that remained did so only through trade pacts and careful diplomacy, and even then they hugged the coasts, never daring to venture inland. The heart of that land stayed under local control, untouched and unconquered. But maybe the most dangerous foes the Vikings ever faced weren't foreign tribes at all. They were their own. The Jomsvikings weren't raiders or farmers. They were something else entirely, a brotherhood of elite warriors who broke away from traditional Norse society to build something new. They studied every flaw in Viking warfare and then designed tactics meant to exploit them. Founded around 960 AD by a Danish outcast named Palnatoki, a man exiled for refusing to convert to Christianity, the Jomsvikings built their order on merit instead of bloodline, skill instead of inheritance. Their fortress, Jomsborg, believed to have stood on Volin Island, became the closest thing the Viking world ever had to a military academy. It was there that the fiercest, most disciplined warriors in the north were forged, trained not just to fight, but to outthink their enemies. But these men, the Jomsvikings, weren't your typical Norse raiders. They had evolved beyond the old Viking way of fighting. Where most Vikings relied on raw courage and the fury of berserkers, the Jomsvikings built something more dangerous: discipline. They'd pinpointed the flaw at the heart of Viking warfare: its dependence on individual heroism. While the average Viking charged into battle hungry for personal glory, the Jomsvikings fought as a single, unified force, precise, coordinated, and coldly efficient. They didn't just fight differently. They'd mapped out the entire Viking playbook and developed countermeasures for every tactic their enemies might use. They knew exactly how Vikings thought, how they attacked, how they reacted, because they were Vikings. Evidence from the Battle of Jorungavagur in 986 AD shows just how lethal that knowledge was. That day, a Norwegian fleet of 70 ships, commanded by Earl Håkon, clashed with a smaller Jomsviking force of 60. But this wasn't the kind of wild, chaotic melee the sagas usually glorify. Contemporary accounts describe a level of order and precision unheard of in Viking warfare. The Jomsvikings fought in tight formations, used intelligence networks to read enemy movements, and executed planned maneuvers that left Håkon's fleet confused and disoriented. The battle raged for 3 long days before the Jomsvikings were finally overpowered. Those who survived were given a grim choice, death or exile. Yet even in defeat they inspired fear. The Norwegians refused to absorb them into their own ranks, afraid that the disciplined mindset of the Jomsvikings might spread and turn traditional Viking hierarchies upside down. Their methods had been too effective, their ideas too dangerous. The Jomsvikings represented something that terrified the Norse world more than any foreign enemy: the possibility that their own way of war could be used against them by those who understood it best. By the year 1000 AD, the Jomsvikings had vanished as an independent force. But they weren't erased by conquest. Their tactics had simply become the new normal. Viking warfare itself had changed, transformed by the very revolution the Jomsvikings started. We often hear the story of the Vikings told as a saga of unstoppable expansion, the hammer of the North sweeping across Europe. But when you look closer, the truth is far more complex. The Vikings weren't invincible conquerors. They were survivors, constantly learning, adapting, and evolving. They won not because they crushed every enemy, but because they learned from the ones who could fight back. The Picts had shown them that brains could outmatch brawn, that terrain, patience, and psychological warfare could defeat even the fiercest army. The Finno-Ugric tribes taught them that mastery of the environment mattered more than the sharpest sword. And the Jomsvikings proved that discipline, structure, and constant innovation were the true keys to power. These forgotten enemies didn't just resist the Vikings, they reshaped them. The places where the Norse built their most successful, lasting settlements weren't always the ones they conquered by force, but the ones where they learned to compromise, to trade, to blend cultures instead of destroying them. That legendary Viking adaptability, the same quality that turned them into explorers, traders, and kings, was born out of facing enemies who couldn't be easily broken. And maybe that's the real legacy of these encounters. The Picts, the Finno-Ugric tribes, and the Jomsvikings preserved something vital: a diversity of tactics, strategies, and ideas that would ripple through Europe for centuries. The lessons learned in the Scottish Highlands, the Finnish forests, and the cold Baltic waters shaped the future of warfare itself. The Vikings may have once been feared across the continent, but in the end, they too learned fear, and from that fear came wisdom. The wisdom to know when to fight, when to retreat, and when to learn from those who understood the art of war even better than they did.